Um, and there's a new climate change assessment that the previous assessments of risk were much too optimistic. In technology, woman says Coors paid her $1,000 to successfully inject advertisements into her dreams.
That's right.
And environment, the poles are very hot. Antarctica and Arctic are 40 and 30 degrees Celsius above normal. Wow. And material, there's a new membrane material that makes purification of gases significantly more efficient. In flight, how much do we really know about what the universe is made of? For us, apparently online happiness classes might work much better than you think. And in terms of health and medicine, an emotional moment, a locked-in patient finally communicates with family via an implant. So that's what we'll talk about. And Richard, what's this in our top story that the new climate change assessment says previous risk assessments were much too optimistic?
This is a report that is from one of the men who is lead authors of this new assessment report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The IPCC is what you usually hear of them as. And this report makes it clear that the global community does not have much time left to act. And one of the lead findings of this is that, while we have been acting, we're not acting fast enough or on a broad enough scale. They have looked closely at what might happen, and there are a variety of forecasts still for what may happen. And at the 3 degrees C temperature rise by 2100, which is still what some people are saying, they're saying this is an absolute disaster. We're at 1.1 C temperature rise already, and look at the kind of climate disasters we have had, where this last year has been the most problems ever. And what they have said when they took the considerable data that they have now and looked back at the earlier studies, they said the earlier studies, the risk estimates were too optimistic. And we're seeing that now with the actual effects worse than we thought. And here's a quote from it. This report comes to the conclusion that existing adaptation efforts are insufficient to properly limit current impacts and avert serious risks in the future. So, as they look at the kind of things that have been done, they certainly see actions around the world. The actions, though, tend to be smaller, more local, more individual actions, and not the kind of deep systemic change that probably is going to be necessary. One of the kinds of things that they are seeing is now, besides talking about mitigation, doing things to put less gas into the environment and removing gas from the environment, they're talking now more seriously about adaptation And for the most part, with the exception of Jakarta in Indonesia, it's still talk. And to do things like uh, move a city to a place where it's not as environmentally endangered is an enormous project. And it's the kind of thing that is probably going to take 20 years to do. So if we really are starting to be serious about it, there are things that we need to be doing now for the future. And uh, certainly those,
Richard, one of us has worked in Jakarta for many years.
uh-huh,
The flooding is just terrible.
yes,
They've sucked up the groundwater, and at the same time, the sea level is rising. So there are many areas that are flooded. You get
right.
to your house by walking on like a jetty, you know. It's the only way that they can continue living. That's why they're moving the capital away from Jakarta.
Yes, yes, and that's a city of 10 million, right? So it's not a small effort.
No, no, it's a huge effort. And most of the people don't have the kind of money necessary to move, to build a house inland and away from the water.
hmm And also, what about places like Shanghai? Isn't that built in a swamp? So that's going to be trouble in China.
The odd thing is, we think of Indonesia, but the worst problem is Bangkok.
Uh-huh.
Bangkok was already flooding when I went there in 1975. Yeah,
And
it was
this is
already flooded.
50 years later.
Virtually, yes.
And Manila has the same thing. Um, I know I wanted to go to get to the airport and taxis couldn't take me because there was too much water. So I went in something akin to a rickshaw.
Yeah. Manila's not as bad off, though, as Bangkok or Jakarta, honestly. I mean, I haven't been in Manila in a couple of years, but, you know, although the drainage from streets is very poor, a large part of the city is adequately above sea level.
So anyway, we are seeing effects of the global warming now. We're seeing them all over the world in many different places, in many different areas, in many different environments. And we have increased the global temperatures by 1.1 degrees. The Paris Agreement was 1.5 degrees max, and I think we're not going to succeed in doing that. The next benchmark, they say, is 2 degrees, and while at 2 degrees, then the reduction and extinction of species will be limited. If we go to 3 degrees, then they say one of the effects is going to be widespread extinctions of species. So we're at the place where we're on the cusp is showing is approaching, and we need to figure out how to start taking effective action, or uh, goodbye.
Any thoughts? Richard, there is a confusion. The global warming is a normal change in the earth. Yes, man has exacerbated it, but there is a normal change in the earth.
Sure, but
We all need to, as Sharon and I have done, to mitigate that. But it's a normal change
in the earth.
But what has been happening since the Industrial Revolution, all the scientists say anyway, is not normal. And the problems that we're having that are making the normal cycle worse are human caused. So the stuff that is causing the waters around Jakarta to rise are not a part of the normal process.
It would
I
be
think you'd have to
interesting
break
if
it.
they have done, it would be interesting to see if they have done studies to show the cost of a massive implementation now to try to reduce the temperature versus the cost of all these hurricanes and floodings we're going to have. I don't know if they've done that study, because I would think that would be much cheaper now to invest heavily than to wait and pay for
They've
it.
done the studies, and the studies show that it's cheaper to prevent the damage than to fix the damage.
If
Yeah.
the
One
damage
thing
is all
that is-
man-made. Because some of the damage, some of the changes are a natural process of the earth.
But
Now,
this is way beyond
I
those
have done
changes.
everything to minimize my impact. But I'm still not sure that some of this isn't natural.
Anyway, wait for 1,000 years and check with the scientists then, if any are still around, and see what they say. Right now, the scientists are almost universal in saying the problems that we have are man created, and these scientists that are saying this include geologists who have looked carefully at weather and climate and the environment for the last 4 billion years, and even they say the problems that we're having are due to humans, not the natural science, the natural cycle. So the ones
But
in
Andrew pointed out
and
several weeks
Andrew
ago.
is, he may have pointed it out. The fact that he can say it doesn't mean that it is correct. Andrew, while he was talking about geologists specifically, I did research after that and sent him a report from the Geological Institute of London or something, the most prestigious one in the world, and their report said it's human caused. I can send you the report if you want it too. So let's just put this to rest. There is a natural cycle. The people who are in the business have heard of this, so this is not new information. I appreciate what you're saying, but this is not new information. The scientists, like the geologists, these are not guys that are being paid off by the clean environment underground. These are scientists who have studied the earth. They say that it is not a natural process what we're going through. And can we just leave it there?
Andrew, could you help me on this?
Yes, I can. I think Norman's absolutely right. Climate change is normal, but Richard is right too. This is happening faster than we've experienced in the past. But the real reality here is that none of the wealthy Western countries have met their CO2 reduction goals, and none are on track to achieve them. And none of the East
I think
We've
we've
lost
lost.
you,
goals
we lost you,
because
Andrew.
they're still trying to consume. Maybe I'm not coming through because I've got a poor internet connection here.
It's
But
intermittent, Andrew.
okay, the main thing is we're not meeting the goals. The climate is changing. The adaptations aren't working. So what do you recommend? Should we start stockpiling guns and ammunition right now? Or should we wait and see what happens? Well,
or should you tell your children and grandchildren not to have any more children?
maybe with a lull in that, we can move on to technology. What's this about? Coors paid a woman $1,000 to get advertisements injected into her dreams.
Well, I knew that these guys were working on this way to be able to market their product, and here's a report of it. And this woman says that she took part in a course experiment last year that was successful in terms of infiltrating her dreams with advertisements for Coors beer. And she responded to a Craigslist ad claiming that a big brand was willing to pay $1,000 for willing sleepers. And so she went to where the ad place was after she enrolled in the program, went to a warehouse in LA, and there were more than a dozen other volunteers. Then they were hooked up to brain monitoring equipment and being watched by reps from Coors Beer. And they were directed to watch a video that featured Coors products amid waterfalls and jungle landscapes. And then, after it was over, they were instructed to try to go to sleep uh, while listening to the soundtrack from the movie that they had just
Oh,
watched. And for the next hour, 8 hours, to kind of keep track of their dream activities. And what she did is she noticed that she had a series of weird Coors dreams, and in one she was on a pogo stick jumping around with Coors product. In another, she was on a plane dropping Coors cans on people, and they were cheering to her. And she actually felt kind of weird about it and said, quote, they were trying to implant Coors into our brains. And apparently they did. This is not the first time that the writer of this article had heard about Core's efforts to inject ads into dreams. There's another thing in 2001 where Coors, along with Xbox and Burger King, were working with scientists to put ads in dreams. And what the people are a little afraid of is now tens of millions of Americans have these smart speakers in their bedroom, and they have some kind of fear that maybe either through getting you to listen to music to help you go to sleep, so they do it with your permission or even without your permission, that now they can start using these smart speakers to give you product oriented dreams to help sell their product.
any thoughts?
Well, the first one is that if the video had subliminal messages, I remember a setup where they would flash an image on the
Yes.
screen and you wouldn't realize it consciously, but your subconscious would catch it and you could recall it later, causing you to walk into a supermarket and buy that product, for example. So I'm not sure that it's just listening to the soundtrack of the video as you go to sleep. I think it may be that they've already introduced something to you at a subliminal level.
Well, certainly they were giving you a video, so you had before the audio track, you had a video track, and it sounded like they were not the momentary subliminals, but they were a little longer because there were images that she reported seeing in the jungle, the Coors can in the jungle.
Well, you know, they've been doing this for decades now. We all remember Vance Packard's book in the 1950s called The Hidden Persuaders, where
Yes.
they were advertisers are subliminally influencing our consumption decisions. And so what? There we are. And what Coors did with this deal is for $50,000 worth of a Mickey Mouse study, they got a couple of $1 million worth of publicity and exposure. They've even got us talking about it on hot science topics. So good for
point.
them. It worked. We all recognize Coors now.
Well, apparently what isn't working is that our poles are enormously hotter than normal, 40 and 30 degrees Celsius above normal. Tell us about that, Richard.
Well, it's the thing that is odd about it is this happened at the same time, and the last I looked, the North Pole and the South Pole were on the opposite ends of the planet and in different climate zones, and yet they both had this extreme heat. In Antarctica, to translate that into Fahrenheit, that's 70 degrees F higher than normal. That's kind of a lot. In the Antarctic, it was only 50 degrees higher at the North Pole. And they, it's just very abnormal. This is while the Earth is 1.1 degrees C hotter, and we see this stuff at the poles that is 30 or 50 degrees C hotter. They, as near as they can tell, these were both kind of weather effects, and they think what happened was there was a big atmospheric river in the south that was pumping warm air from the Pacific southward, and in the north it was another air current pumping warm Atlantic air north, and so you could argue it was some weather function. But I think, as the air in the planet gets hotter, it has to go somewhere, and air moves from hot areas to cool areas. So it's not surprising that those two things happened at the same time to me, because the air in the middle is hotter and it's got to go somewhere. So it's just another odd weather phenomena. Thank goodness it's not because of climate change, though.
Thoughts? Well, Richard, if nobody's taking you up on that, what's this about this new membrane material that makes purification of gases much more efficient?
Now, the reason that I have this story is not because membranes are so cool or anything. It's this. This is actually, I think, a climate change remediation story, because it turns out presently in industrial processes around the world where they are separating, doing things like purified natural gas or producing oxygen or nitrogen, these kind of industrial processes, they use between 10 and 15% of the energy in the world is used in industrial processes separating gases. That's equivalent to something like half of the internal combustion engine cars on the planet. So it's a fairly significant number. And what they have found is these new approaches to making membranes for this separation can reduce the energy required to 1/10 of what was needed. And the processes that they can make more energy efficient are these industrial processes that are hard to make green. So this is, when it's fully implemented, is equivalent to removing about half of the gas-powered cars from the from use. So it's a pretty significant impact to the environment. And what this is a project that has been going on for years between researchers at MIT and Stanford University. And what they have figured out how to do is to make a new kind of polymer membrane. And here they make one polymer chain and then make another polymer chain and hook them together and make little ladders. And they can turn these polymer chains into sheets, and the size of the hole in the ladder depends on the particular material that they use to make the ladder out of, so they can vary that, and based on the size of the hole determines what kind of gases will get through and what kind of gases will not get through. For example, they are able to separate oxygen from nitrogen, and the difference in size between those atoms is only about 0.18 angstroms, which is basically 10 billionths of a meter. So the difference in size is not very big, but they can make these membranes with enough precision to be able to make one that can separate things with that small of a size of a difference. And so these have applications all over the place that matter in this time we're in. One is the separation of carbon dioxide from other gases. Another is the purification of biogas made from agricultural products. And another one is hydrogen separation. If we're going to have a hydrogen economy, it would be nice if we could do things like electrolyze water and be able to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen easily. And so these kind of membranes will come into place in a lot of uses because they're embedded in all these industrial products, though this kind of change is probably going to take a decade to come about. But it's one of the things that is going to make a difference for the power consumption of industrial processes around the world.
You had an article recently, Richard, also about separation, cleaning liquids with a similar process, which
Yes,
could be used like
that was made out of graphene. Yes,
right,
graphene with holes in it.
right, and it could be used potentially for desalination, which could be a tremendous application. And I was also thinking about Lake Chapala.
Yes,
And the
we
water
can
coming down
purify
from the
Lake
south
Chapala.
wall. Right.
And the part of for me, the point of these stories, particularly if you look at here we have these membranes with holes in them that, we wouldn't think about. We don't know about this stuff, but those things are significant in dealings with gases and liquids and separating them and purify them. The other area where this kind of nanochemistry is powerfully in effect is in the making now of catalysts, because they're able to make catalysts that are the right shape to fit one atom at a time inside it so it can have the maximum effect. And these catalysts are also significantly making processes more efficient around the world, and that they're one of the things that I think will end up helping us do things like pull carbon out of the air, because the catalysts are at the heart of a lot of these electrical carbon sequestration processes.
Any thoughts?
One thing that's kind of suspect here is saying that it's 10 to 15% of the total energy consumption, because any examination of the US energy consumption shows that only about 25% of the energy is used in industrial processes. And to say that more than half of that energy is just used for gas separation sounds like a stretch to me. So they may be calculating this in an unusual way.
Could be. We don't have the background of the numbers, so.
The other thing is, the article says it's taken them 6 years or something to
8 years. 8 years.
8 years to get this to work in the lab. So to commercialize it and to get it to work at any kind of scale is going to take decades. Now, sure, it's a good thing.
Maybe it depends on what the problems were in the lab, and if in the lab you end up through your 8 years work having a process that is reliable and repeatable, then it's not going to take that long to commercialize it. That way you have something you can scale up. And certainly the impression I get is they believe that this is something they can scale up. But again, we'll see.
Yeah, it's good news, but
Yeah.
whether it's going to solve our problems or not is another.
Well, as long as it contributes to the solution of the problem, then it is useful, I believe. If it makes things less bad, then I think it makes things less bad.
When we say we have to wait, the issue is we hear about these things and then we wait and we never hear again. And probably something stupendous is happening or not. And I'm left in the dark about the results of things we hear about that are so exciting. But anyway, we can move on, because what I really want to know is what the universe is made of. And the question is, how much do we know?
I have some bad news for you, Fred, and that is, about 100 years ago, we were able to figure out that only about 1/6 of the universe is what now they call ordinary matter. The stuff you can see. And the other 5/6 of it is something else. They know that it's there because of the gravitational effects of it, and so they know that it's there, and they know it has gravitational effects, but that's about all they know. They now call it dark matter, and as they're studying dark matter, one of the things that the physicists talk about is self-interaction with dark matter. Somehow dark matter, we don't know what it's doing, but we think it's doing it with itself. So I'm not sure how they know that, but that's what they think. And they are thinking that maybe dark matter has some kind of interaction similar to electricity with charged particles with electrons, but they don't really know. Uh, what they do know, or they think, is that dark matter points to some physics that's beyond any physics that we know now. And uh, within that, some of the questions that they're asking are, why would dark matter interact with itself so strongly? And what does this self interaction entail? Is it some new force of nature? And the author of this started to think about this problem more deeply after some other article came out about self interacting dark matter. And she thinks that she's identified a process that the dark matter does not require a new force in nature, but it might just simply involve gravity. And we know that dark matter uses gravity, but still, it looks like also they're thinking that somehow because of this self-interaction with dark matter, it's making massive objects that we can't identify or see because, of course, they're made out of dark matter. And, they don't have any idea why dark matter would be organized into massive objects. And what they say is, that what both dark matter and that anomaly, remember that interstellar object that came into the solar system last year? What was its name? Unamawa or something, I can't pronounce it. And they say the universe is actually filled with dark matter and anomalous objects. But, from our point of view, our limited point of view on this puny little planet, we don't see many of them, but there's lots of them out there. We don't know what's going on. And they say we're at a point in our science that to learn from these anomalies, maybe we need to silence the ego of the experts who tend to explain them away and look for new knowledge. And this is the way that we can uh, eliminate the dust that prevents us from seeing the new knowledge. And so the answer is we don't know what it is, and we don't know what we don't know, and we may have to change the way that we think about everything to make much sense out of it, but we don't know. How's that for an answer, Fred?
All right. What does anybody else think?
There's a lot we don't know.
Yes, indeed.
And that's for sure.
Now, one of the things that amused me about that particular article is it was from an internet site, The Hill, which is a fairly conservative website reporting mainly on political matters in Washington, D.C. And I cannot tell you why they're running articles on the mysteries of the universe.
There's a lot of dark matter in DC.
Yes, okay, that's it.
Richard, I think a few years ago, I read an article that was saying dark matter might be simply the way we do our calculations,
Right.
mathematics, and that we're making certain kind of assumptions that produce dark matter. And if we made different assumptions, there wouldn't be any. Do many people think that?
Well, certainly, I've read the same stuff that you did, Fred, and one was saying if you just tweak the gravitational force in the equations a little, then you don't need dark matter. So maybe we just don't understand gravity.
Well, Richard, I'm not at all sure that this makes me very happy. But apparently, some of these online happiness classes work very much better than you might think. Tell us about it.
Well, I think it's interesting because in this COVID period that we're in, uh, how do you reach people? How do you teach people? How do you do things with people that can affect their well-being? And there now is a growing body of evidence suggesting that you can do things to improve your sense of well being and satisfaction, uh, and you can do it by an educational intervention. They used to call those classes before the internet time and before this era. And at Yale, one of the things that happened is they uh, started a class, Psychology and the Good Life. And has become the most popular class at Yale. And it's the most popular class in the school's history. And the courses, though they're about happiness, the good life anyway, uh, they don't teach happiness. The researchers look at the concept of positive psychology rather than treating the negative feelings like depression and anxiety. Positive psychology focuses on how to cultivate a sense of satisfaction and purpose in life. What they found is hedonistic happiness, going after the pleasures in life, is just something that gives short term results, but doesn't help in the long term. That kind of happiness is elusive, and rather the happiness that comes from focusing on the value of your activities is more beneficial in the long term. That is, on the value of your activities, what they contribute to yourself and to other people. And this approach is to try to direct your attention towards the well being of others. And if you do this, your own happiness will be the payoff. I know that's what I talked about at UU recently in my giving talk. And I can't help it that the scientists found out the same thing. But here, what they are doing in this class is giving pre recorded lectures that give different approaches to happiness in life. They talk about things like the importance of sleep and journaling and meditation and exercise. And it's kind of interesting. They also stress that you should think critically about what you want in life and why. Courses like this, they say, get you to introspect, and that's good for you and good for your well being. When they did the class, basically everyone started out reporting similar levels of happiness. At the end of the class, though, they saw uh, a small but regular and predictable increase in happiness. They had a 33-point scale of happiness, and the people who went through the class gained 1 point. Not a big increase, but an increase. They had a control group of people who didn't go through the class. The control group happiness dropped by about 1.5 points. So the difference between them was about 2.5 points on the 33-point scale. So again, not big, but they found it reliable. And they can say, even though you may not be able to transform somebody into the happiest person in the world, still the pursuit of a happier life and more feelings of quality of the life is a worthwhile thing to do. And, overall, what they were able to do is first they did this in the classroom, and then they have put this up in an online course that is offered through Coursera is the name of the service, and their online course has had 3.8 million people participate, and they find that they're getting the same kind of results from this online course that they were able to get from the in-person course. So here they have a way to help people. They're not making them happy all the time, but they are equipping them with the skills and tools to have a healthy mind and to be able to cope with the challenges they make. And though relatively it's a small increase, when you multiply that by millions of people, there can be a bigger impact on society as a whole. Now, since these are academic people, they're still researching. They're not sure how long these benefits last, and part of it is from practice. They start them trying to make new habits like walking and meditating. And as somebody who's tried to teach meditation for years, making new habits, even ones that are beneficial and can change your life, is difficult for a lot of people. So they're afraid that maybe this stuff won't stick. The happiness will not stick because the people haven't been able to sustain those habits. But this is something they're continuing to try to research and understand. One of the guys who created these classes, though, he says he is practicing now what he teaches, and it makes him feel less competitive. He meditates regularly, even though this was something he'd never dreamed about doing. He says, the data convinced me. The fact that they've done this repeatedly, each time with a variety of different subjects and cohorts, and they got the same results, shows him that something is there. So he's actually changed his life. It didn't say what his happiness scores are, but I suspect they are higher. And again, in the hot science, I gave you a link to the free course, and it might be something that you can look at and maybe take, and maybe it has something in there for you to make you just a little bit happier.
Any thoughts?
I'll look at it.
I would say that Yale has a really good study, long study design here, because they can certainly measure not only from the people who took it in person, but the people who've been taking it online since. over years and years and years, because they keep good track of their
Yes.
graduates, right?
Yes.
So this could be one of those things that goes on for 20, 30, 50 years.
Yes.
Well, one thing that is worth noting is when they do happiness studies around the world, a lot of third world countries register higher than Western countries, in part because third world people have more realistic expectations. And one of the problems that we have in the West is people have high expectations of what their lives are going to be like as a result of convincing advertising. So maybe
Or
the whole
or social media. One of the things that they teach in these online courses is that your life is not going to be perfect like you see the media figures on Instagram where it looks like their life is perfect. So that's something they try to at least mention going by.
yeah, and maybe what these courses do is help people get a more realistic set of
Uh-huh.
expectations.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if this were one of those courses that satisfied one of those distribution requirements that everybody has to take. And it sounds like a good one.
Uh-huh. Now, I took it. I didn't continue. The first lesson had a self-assessment of happiness, and I scored so high on that it was hard to see how I was going to improve if I took a bunch more classes. So I just put it aside and smiled from happiness.
Well, the reason you feel happy is because you know you're useful, and the people who are unhappy are ones that are less useful.
Right, absolutely. That's one of the things that I talk about is having a sense of purpose.
And if you're useful, you're
Right,
valued by your society,
right.
and that's important to people.
And also, I would say an incidental one with that that goes into brain chemistry, when you have things to do, goals that you have each day, when you meet those goals or take a step on them that you recognize, then your brain generates dopamine, which gives you happiness and also gives you a new burst of energy. So, by doing this stuff that makes you happy, if you notice you're achieving an interim goal along the way, it gives you more energy to be more happy.
So, Richard, for our final story, what's this about somebody who got an implant so that although he had formerly been locked in with no connection to the outside world, now he could communicate with his family?
I think this is one of the best reports that we have read so far about the brain computer interface. This was a man in his mid 30s who had ALS, and that what he was able to do by using this brain computer interface is to be able to, one letter at a time, uh, construct sentences that he could communicate to his family and have a way to be able to interact with the people around him uh, for the first time, literally in years. And so there are people who have an advanced form of ALS who have what are called locked in syndrome. And this is a rare condition where people are conscious and can see, hear, and smell, but are unable to move or to speak due to complete paralysis of their voluntary muscles. In the early stage, they can still blink and communicate with blinking, but in later stages, they can't even control their blinking. And so here they started with working with this customer, this particular patient, a few years ago when he was still capable of blinking and giving his consent to the process. And in the intervening time, they started working, the researchers started working with him. And first, they uh, taught him, or he taught himself, how to generate brain activity that could alter the frequency of a sound wave. Since he could hear that frequency, and he had auditory feedback to know if he was succeeding. And so he was able to somehow change the frequency of the sound. Then, once he could do that, then they worked to apply the same strategy to control a spelling program, which allows him to select letters one at a time. And it's not like this is easy. It takes him about a minute per letter. But as slow as that is, if you have your choice between not communicating and communicating, even though it is slow, then you're going to try to communicate. And he was able to be successful. He's a German man, and one of the things that he was able to request is feeding him through the tube, which bypassed his mouth altogether. He wanted goulash soup and beer. And I don't know if he enjoyed it, but he got it anyway. He also, and this one touches me, asked if his 4-year-old son would like to watch a Disney film with him. You know, what a wonderful thing for this man in the locked in condition to be able to do. He also asked his mother for a head massage. And the writer observed one time when he was there, he saw the man say, "Thank you for everything, sister," to his sister who helps care for him. And it was such an emotional moment. And, you know, one of the questions they had about these locked in people is whether they lose their ability to communicate after years in this condition. And certainly here they show the brain is still going, they can still learn new things, they can still communicate, and they still want to communicate. And this is the first study to achieve communication by someone who has no remaining voluntary movement, and now the BCI is his sole means of communicating, and he's able to use it. And as I say, communicate with his family and his friends, and ask his son to watch a movie with him. And I think this is amazing, and the implication of this kind of technology for other people who have this or similar kind of problems is really positive for the future.
Any thoughts?
I think it's a wonderful story, and I just wonder if artificial intelligence might help gradually to improve his ability to communicate.
I bet it will. I bet they'll make it faster.
Richard, do you know how they can tell the difference between somebody who's locked in and somebody who's basically unconscious?
I think they can tell the difference by brain waves, but like you said, that actually is a problem, and they can't tell all the time. They say they can diagnose it about 70% of the time. So that means about a third of the time they can't tell. Certainly, I could imagine that they could tell by having a brain device on him and uh, communicating and seeing if they were having signals that would be associated with sound, for example.
Like there are circumstances where people want to know whether to pull the tube.
Right.
And they want to know, now, is this person actually aware of anything or not?
Yes. And so sometimes they can tell and sometimes they can't. And I can see that with these people who have lost total control of their voluntary systems, I can bet it's hard to tell.
Well, Richard, I think maybe it's time to go then. But thanks so much for all of this. And thanks to everybody else for participating. And
Good
once
job.
again, we'll see you next week unless somebody had something else to say. What was that?
Oh, I was just saying, I really enjoy it. Good job.
Good.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Adios. Namaste, as we say over in my Hindu neck of Chapala. See you.
Okay.